Okay, so this is your review for the test. So remember on this, the test is Thursday. And the first one says match the given function to one of the graphs. So the first thing you notice about it is it's a sine graph. And so whenever it's a sine graph, it goes through 0, 0. And so because of that, you can rule out a couple of choices. So it's either A or D.
It's D.
Right. The next thing you can look at is it's a minus sign in front, which means it reflects the x-axis. So that means it's going to go down after the origin instead of up. Yeah. So that means it's D. Very good. And we also knew that it was a amplitude of 3. And we also knew that W was 1/4. And remember, your two formulas are the period equal the normal period divided by W. Y'all usually use the T variable. Let me put that here instead. Like T equal normal period divided by W. That means if you solve for W, then it'd be the normal period divided by T. These are your two main formulas you're going to want to use. The period is the normal period over W, and the W is the normal period over T. So in our case, we're going to say period is 2 pi over 1/4, which makes it 8 pi, because you multiply your outsides. And that means like it's starting here at the origin and it's slanting down, and here at the origin it'd be slanting down after that. So here's showing your period is 8 pi. Remember, on some graphs they show 2 periods worth, but this one just has 1. You can also think of from negative 2 pi to 6 pi if you want to, from height to height. But, you know, in either case, the period is 8 pi. Okay, so that's number 1. The second one says amplitude 9, period 2. So if it's amplitude of 9, then it can't be this one or this one, because the 9 has to be in front. So you're down to these two choices. And it says period is 2, so we would say period is W is the period, W is the normal period 2 pi divided by the 2, that gives you pi. And so that's what goes in front of X, and so it's this one. Again, the formula was W equal the normal period divided by the period. W equal the normal period over T. Now, in this particular lesson, your normal period's always going to be 2 pi, because this is just on sine and cosine. In another lesson, we'll do the tangent and cotangent graphs, so that's when it will be pi. Any questions? And also in this lesson, we're not doing horizontal shifts. That'd be later. Okay, the next one says match the function -6 cosine 8x to the correct graph. So it's a negative cosine graph, so that means it reflects the x-axis. And so that means it's going to go through the ordered pair 0, -6. Because sine goes through the origin and cosine doesn't. So there are two graphs that are decent candidates. Now, because on this one it's showing 2 periods worth, that means 32 pi would be for 2 periods, and so 16 pi would be 1 period on the B graph. And on this one, if pi halves is for 2 periods, then pi fourths would be for 1 period. It means that from here to here is pi fourths, and from here to here is another pi fourths, and that pi fourths plus pi fourths equal pi halves. And yeah, 16 pi and another 16 pi makes 32. Okay, so we're still down to those two choices. We know our W is 8, and so we can say that the period equal 2 pi divided by 8, and so that would simplify to pi fourths. So that means it's going to be this choice. Another thing you can think of is when you're graphing it, -6, cosine 8x. There's your graph. If it's extremely wavy when you do this, then that means it'd be the one with the small period. Okay, so it's extremely wavy when you graph it, so that means it's a small period. Okay, so if you see something like this, it's going to be the pi divided by whatever instead of the big number. Okay, so that's an easy way for y'all to remember that. Any questions? Okay, number 4. Okay, write an equation for the graph shown. So it doesn't go through the origin, so we know it's a cosine graph. And it looks like it's going down to -7 and going up to +7. So -7 to 7. So what that means is our amplitude 7. We also know that since it went through this ordered pair 0, -7, that it reflects the x-axis. So those are like basically how we start it. So we know it's going to start with -7 cosine wx. Now we have to figure out what the w is before we can answer that, but we're off to a good start. So we know it's -7 cosine something x. Okay, so our next part is, in order to get the w, we have to figure out the period. So basically, you can see at this low spot, it's starting to go up, and at this low spot, it's starting to go up. So that means this is 1 period worth. And so this is counting out to 8. And so looks like we're counting by ones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that means our period is 5. Our period is 5. And so we'd have W is 2 pi divided by 5. And so we get 2 pi over 5x. So you take your normal period, divide by your period, that's your W. Any questions? All right, so number 5, this one says determine the amplitude and period of the function without graphing. It has 6 cosine pi x, so that means our amplitude's 6 and our W is pi. Those are the two easy parts. And then to get your period, we remember it's 2 pi divided by the W. So 2 pi over pi cancels, and you're left with 2. Remember, these questions are similar to what was on your worksheet homework, and you can use your worksheet homework on the test, but not the review. You'll get those back tomorrow. Okay, the next one, number 6, graph y equal 5 sine x, show at least 2 cycles. First thing is it's asking about the domain, and if it's sine or cosine, it's going to be all real numbers. But it wants it in interval notation, so that'd be from negative pi to pi. Yeah, that's what I meant. I said the wrong thing. I wrote the right thing. Yeah, negative infinity to infinity. What I was thinking was some people on the worksheet put negative 8 to 8, which is wrong. It's negative infinity to infinity. Yes. Okay, so we have our domain. Remember, if it's sine or cosine, it's going to be all real numbers. And it says to use interval notation, so this is what it would look like. The next thing is, because it's asking for the range, that means we use the amplitude, and it's going to be from the high part to the low part. So bracket negative 5, 5. Yeah, that's because of the amplitude. It wants it in interval notation, so that's the answer. Not negative 5 less than or equal to y less than or equal to 5. That would be counted wrong on Math Excel. You're supposed to use it this way. Okay, so then let's graph it. It's sine, so that means it goes through the origin, so you can put your dot there. Our W is 1 because there's no number in front of x, and that means our period would be 2 pi. So this is how we start that graph. We make it go through the origin, and if our period is 2 pi, then if we went through the origin, then at 2 pi and at negative 2 pi, there would be x-intercepts. Okay? The next thing is you need to use your middle, which would also be x-intercepts, so that's at pi and negative pi. So those are all your x-intercepts. Are you okay? Okay. All right. Is it a positive sine graph or a negative sine graph? Correct. And so because of that, you go to the middle of this one, which is pi halves, and go up to 5. So this particular ordered pair is pi halves comma 5. And then this one in the middle would go down to negative 5. This ordered pair would be 3 pi halves, comma negative 5. And this is your graph. So that's one period worth. Then we would just continue it. So it wouldn't be up again so soon, so it'd be down. So in the middle of this, you put this as negative pi halves, comma negative 5, and then this one would be positive. Any questions about this one? All right. Oops, let me keep it there. Okay. Next we have the question that's asking about 2 sine x and what's the y-intercept. So remember, since it's a sine graph, it goes through 0, 0. The directions say you want an integer or decimal. So in this case, it'd just be an integer, which is 0. So the next part says, what numbers from negative pi to pi is it increasing? Okay, well, let's talk about that right now. Okay, so the first step would be graph it. We've got 2 sine x. And we care about negative pi to pi. And so we go window, settings, negative pi to pi. Yeah, that's the x min and x max. Okay, so this is what your graph looks like from negative pi to pi. So I'm going to graph that on paper. Okay, so this part, which is in the middle, is high. So that means pi halves would be high. In this case, there's a 2 for our amplitude. So we're going to count up to 2. It's going to look like this. And then down to this one. Okay, so here's our graph. So that's just showing one period worth. And the increasing part means it's like similar to positive slope, for example. So that'd be this part. Let me do this in a different color. Positive slope is like that. And so that means our answer would be from negative pi halves to pi halves. So that's where it's increasing. Okay, then it's asking for the absolute maximum, so that'd be 2 because that's our height and our amplitude. Now this one, they have a different interval, and it's asking for where it's equal to 0. So these are the 2 pieces of information that are important. So what I'm going to do is change my window, make this 0, and make this 2 pi. Right. So 0 to 2 pi. So I'm going to graph that. If it's from 0 to 2 pi, then pi would also have an x-intercept. And again, we're going up to 2, so here, and then down to 2, which is here. So there's our graph. Again, that's showing one period worth. Again, think of to the right of 0, it's starting to slant up, and then after the 2 pi, it would slant up. So that's showing 1 period worth. Now we just want to know where it's equal to 0, which would be at 0, pi, and 2 pi. 0, pi, 2 pi. Exactly. So for f of x equals 0, that's where the x-intercepts are. Okay. Now the next part says what are the x-intercepts, and so on this particular problem on this, this matches this part, and so we know we're going to want 0, pi, and 2 pi, but we've got to choose the correct pattern. So when it says k is in an integer, then what I'd rather y'all do, what I'd like you to do, is start with k equals 0, and then put 1, and then put 2, and then see what works. So if you put k as an integer and k as 0, 2 times 0 would be 0. Which matches what we have, right? But now when we put k equal 1, that means you're going to do 2 times 1, which is 2, and you have 2 pi. And so this one, you're missing pi. No pi for you. So it's not that one. Right. The next one, k is 0, so this would end up being negative 1 pi over 2, which means negative pi halves. And you can stop right there. It's not 0, and it's not negative pi halves, so can't be that one. On C, if k were 0, you'd be at 0. And then when it's 1, it'd be 1 times pi, which is pi, and 2 times pi, which is 2 pi. So this one matches what we want. And again, if you did D and plugged in a 0 there, you get negative pi halves. Is it always going to be what? No, because sometimes it may have, if it has something like sine of 2x instead of 2 sine x, then you might have a different pattern. Yeah, so it depends on the function. So for what we're given, it's these, which is the k pi. So like, for example, this is just somebody's random paper, and it says cosine x, and so then that one was from negative, that's the 2k minus 1 over 2 times pi. And again, what's different is this one says where it's equal to 1, and this one is where it's an x-intercept. It does matter. That's what I'm saying. Because this was 0, pi, and 2 pi, and we had pi. In fact, since I showed this as a random example, let me make sure I show the answer, because just glancing at it, this part doesn't look right. So on number 14, y'all were supposed to get negative 2 pi, 0, and 2 pi. Not this inequality. Yeah. So this should have been negative 2 pi, comma, 0, comma, 2 pi. Yeah, but it doesn't have the right symbol. And this part's correct, though. Yeah, that part's correct. Okay, so let's go back to our review. Any other questions on 7 before we move on? Okay, so for this one, amplitude 2, which means it can't be the one with a 6 in front. And then it says period is 6 pi, so we'd say we'd say W equal 2 pi over 6 pi. So those cancel and you get 1/3. So 2 sine 1/3 x. Remember again, if you need to write it, it's 2 pi over t. Any questions? Okay. Okay, the next one, write an equation for the graph. So we know that this starts up here at 0,3/8. So that means it's not sine. And we also know that the 3/8 would have to be in front. So that means it's really nothing except for A or B, and at this point we already know it's A. I'll continue talking about this one though. So we know our amplitude is 3/8, and for our period, we'd say from this high point to this high point, which means our period equal 1/2. And so our W would be 2 pi divided by 1/2, which is 4 pi. And that's what they have for both of these choices. But again, because it's not sine, it'd be choice A in this problem.
And it's not sine because it doesn't go.
Correct. Because it's not 0, 0. Because on this lesson, we're not dealing with horizontal shifts, like moving something left or right. So this one would go through 0, 3/8. This one would have gone through 0, 0. If it's sine, it has to go through the origin. If it's cosine, it's either going to start high or low. In this case, it's starting high, so it's going to go 0, 3/8. Any questions about that? All right. So this next one, find an equation for this. There are 3 answers where it says -6, and one that's +6 that doesn't make sense. Because all these are, below the x-axis. And so at the -6, we can draw our horizontal line, y equal -6. That's our middle. Okay. And so it's starting at 0, -6. Again, that's our middle, and so we're going to treat that like it's sine going through that. Okay, so again, we're continuing this. We're going to treat this like it's a sine graph. Normally we think sine goes through the origin, but in this case we translated down 6. So this is going to be kind of like, instead of using the x-axis, this is our middle line. So this is going to be a sine graph, which means it's not this one. And as far as our period, it's starting to slant up here. And so find the middle and then where it's starting to slant up. So this one has a period that's 1/5. Our period is 1/5. And so then our W would be 2 pi divided by 1/5, which is 10 pi, not 20. So we want the one with 10 pi, so that's the first one. And it went from -6 to 6 here. So our range would have been from -12 to 0. Okay, so that's the correct equation. So even though the amplitude is 6, doesn't mean it goes 6 and then -6 in this case, because we had a vertical translation. It went from -12 to 0. Any questions about that one? So this was a little more complicated because you had a vertical translation, which means you had a middle line. So this one is not from -6 to 6 due to the vertical translation. Okay. Anything else on 10? Okay. Number 11. This one says 3 sine pi thirds x plus 2. So the first thing we know is it's up to, and that's where our middle line's going to be. And we have a 3 here for our amplitude. So we have to go 2 plus 3 is 5. So this is as high as it goes. And 2 minus 3 equal -1. So this is as low as it goes. So that means our range is from -1 to 5. What was that?
Why do you have to do 2 minus 3?
Oh, because this is our middle, and we have to go 3 down because our amplitude's 3.
Yeah, and it's your top 3 above.
Yeah, exactly. 3 above, so 5, and 3 below, so -1. Okay, let's see. Let's answer these and then we'll continue it. Determine the domain. It's a sine graph, so we know it's from -infinity to infinity. And the range would be what we just answered, -1 to 5. Okay, so the next part is about the graph. And let's see, it's a sine graph, so it means it goes through the origin. But in this case, we shifted up to, so it goes through 0, 2. Correct. Now, to get that, we need to find our period, which was 2 pi over pi thirds, and that's how she got that, because it'd be 6 pi over pi, which is 6. So this one is 6, 2, and -6, 2. Okay, then we also need to find the middle between 0 and 6 would be 3. So at 3, 2, and at -3, 2. Those are going to be all our x-intercepts. Well, I'm saying x-intercept, that's going to be where, well, I'm just going to say when y equal 2, x equal plus and minus 6, plus and minus 3, or 0. So that's where it's going to have your 5 dots. Okay, and so it's a positive 3, so that means we go up first. And so at 1.5, which is the middle, we go up to 5. And then at this middle, between 3 and 6 is 4.5, we go down to -1. And just continue the pattern. This one goes down to -1 and back up, and this one goes up to 5 and down. So that's what we want, because that's 2 periods worth. If you were trying to go all the way to 8, it would have been like this part in red, and this part over here in red. But that's not really necessary. So basically you'd say vertical shift on Math Excel would be 2, amplitude would be 3. Make sure you choose it's the sine graph, and there's no horizontal, and t equals 6. So if you do these features, then it would draw it for you.
Can we grab these in our calculator or no?
Yeah, you can do that also. Yeah.
Like, will the points be in decimal though, probably?
Well, you'd know -62, 02, and 62 would work.
Okay.
Let's see. 3 sine pi thirds x, and then +2. Okay, so it looks like this, but again in your table, you've got the points that we talked about. Okay, that's the end.